Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When I moved to the hills of Arkansas, all I wanted was peace. 6 acres, no neighbors, no noise. But when construction trucks started dumping trash on my land and the HOA declared it their approved zone, they sparked a war they never saw coming, and I don't lose on my own soil. I moved to the hills of Arkansas to get away from this kind of crap. Peace, privacy, and 6 acres of well-kept land with nothing but bees, trees, and my irrigation lines for company. I run a landscape reclamation business, and my property is not just where I live. It's where I think, where I breathe. I'm not part of any HOA, and I didn't move out here to play community games or listen to wannabe suburban emperors bark orders. So, when the noise started, heavy trucks grinding gears at 6 in the morning, nail guns, concrete mixers, the thud of careless construction, I tried to tune it out. I told myself it was temporary, just some expansion work in Hollow Pines Preserve, the upscale HOA subdivision that borders my western tree line. A week later, I walked the back of my property and found a pile of cracked cinder blocks and busted PVC piping under my old oak tree. I stared at it for a good 30 seconds, trying to process whether someone had accidentally tossed a piece of drywall into the woods and just kept going. But no, this wasn't a mistake. There were 2 more piles spaced along the tree line, one of them already half buried in mulch and broken pallets. Someone was using my land, my private, clearly posted land, as a dump. I didn't rage. I didn't shout. I took photos, marked GPS coordinates, and checked my trail cams. That night, I installed a fresh set of no trespassing signs with bright yellow lettering. I even laminated them. Then I called the construction supervisor listed on the permit sign near the new homes going up, some guy named Wes. Left him a polite voicemail, told him about the mess, said I had cameras and expected cleanup within 72 hours. Nothing happened. 4 days later, a new pile showed up, bigger this time. It had siding chunks, a bucket of dried cement, plastic wrap from pallets, a snapped rake, and half a fast food order still in the bag. My trail cam caught the tail end of a construction truck backing up near the border, but I didn't have a plate or a face, just taillights and arrogance. I sent another message to Wes, still no reply, so I flew my drone. The first flight showed nothing, but on the second evening, I caught it live. A big blue dump truck trundled up to the back lot near my tree line, reversed slowly, and let loose a full load of construction waste straight across my fence line. I zoomed in. The driver looked around, shut the gate, and drove off like he'd just clocked out from a shift at the garbage company. And then, because reality likes to outdo satire, a worker came along 20 minutes later and hammered in a stake with a sign that read, HOA approved dump zone. That's when I laughed, a slow shaking laugh that started in my chest and worked its way out like a release valve on a pressure tank. They thought I was passive because I didn't scream. They mistook restraint for surrender. That night, I copied all the footage, printed the stills, logged the coordinates, and began planning what I call, in my files, Operation Courtesy Return. I didn't sleep much that night, but not out of anger, adrenaline. There's a certain clarity that hits when someone pushes you too far and you finally get to do something about it. I wasn't going to yell at a fence or stage a protest. I was going to do what I do best, move earth. Literally. By morning, I'd arranged for 2 of my company's old dump trucks, legal, licensed, insured. They weren't flashy, but they could haul mountains. I sent 2 of my most reliable guys out on real jobs and took the day for myself. Loaded up the rest of the garbage from my property. All of it. Piles of broken rebar, wet insulation, cracked tiles, rotting lumber, and whatever else their contractors had so generously delivered under cover of tree shade and cowardice. I wore gloves, a respirator, and carried a clipboard. I wanted everything to look orderly, documented. I stacked the waste neatly in the trucks and drove them over after dark. I wasn't stupid. I didn't trespass. I pulled up to the wide-open HOA common lot at the entrance to Hollow Pines. It was pristine. Manicured turf, model home flags flapping in the breeze, little solar lights guiding the gravel path to their freshly erected welcome pavilion. That's where they held their weekend brunches and wine tastings, right next to their office trailer. I parked right in front of the future resident welcome tent, reversed in slowly, and began the return. 2 truckloads, 10 yards of filth each. I didn't dump it recklessly. I placed it, layer by layer. A reverse archaeological dig of their arrogance, laid bare on their shiny, polished gravel. At the very top of the pile, I planted a laminated sign with industrial zip ties, just like the ones they ignored on my land. Property returned, courtesy delivery of construction debris unlawfully deposited on private land. Next delivery will include legal documents. Have a pleasant day. I also made sure the security camera pointed at the pavilion got a clear view of me. Hood off, face forward, calm and composed. Let them explain that one to the cops. I didn't sneak away. I walked the perimeter, took a few photos in the moonlight, and drove home at the speed limit. The next morning, I uploaded everything, drone footage, trail cam shots, the new dump sites photos, into a dated and time-stamped cloud folder. Printed 2 copies, one for my files, one just in case. By noon, Hollow Pines was in chaos. I heard the yelling from across the tree line, people stomping around in loafers and polo shirts, HOA staff in a frenzy. My phone stayed quiet. No calls, no texts, just the sound of petty empires trembling. It took them 24 hours to respond. The first sign of retaliation was a car pulling up to my gate, turning around, and leaving. Then came a manila envelope, dropped in my mailbox without a stamp. Inside, a tersely worded letter from the Hollow Pines HOA accusing me of unauthorized dumping and public defacement of community property. The kicker: they demanded $60,000 for damages to community image and loss of investment momentum. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. So this was how they wanted to play. Fine. I was done being quiet. I'd return their trash. Next, I'd bury them in evidence. They didn't waste any time. The day after I returned their trash, I came home to find a sheriff's deputy parked by my gate. Nice guy, apologetic, said he was just doing his job. Apparently, someone from the Hollow Pines HOA had filed a formal complaint claiming I'd illegally disposed of hazardous materials on community grounds. I asked if they had mentioned the part where those same materials had come from my property in the first place. He smirked, but said nothing. Professional courtesy. I offered to walk him along the property line, show him the signs, the cameras, the trash piles still in the woods, because no, they hadn't even cleaned all of it up. He nodded, took notes, and said he'd add it to the report. No citations, no arrest, just paperwork. But it wasn't about law enforcement. Not really. It was about pressure. The HOA president, Karen Glazer, had finally come out from behind her wine tastings and petty bylaws. She wasn't just mad. I think she was embarrassed. And people like her, they treat embarrassment like an act of war. Within 48 hours, I received an official notice. Hollow Pines Homeowners Association versus Troy Banks. Civil complaint, property damage, defamation, vandalism. Requested damages, $60,000. I wasn't surprised. I'd been expecting something stupid, but they really went all in. The complaint was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive fiction. They claimed I intentionally sabotaged community cohesion, accused me of malicious dumping of unknown substances, and even alleged that I had intimidated Hollow Pines staff with threatening gestures. I guess walking while male with a clipboard qualifies as terrorism these days. That same afternoon, Hollow Pines posted an open letter on their community website, easily visible to anyone searching for new homes in the area. In it, they described me as a belligerent individual with a vendetta against progress, warned potential buyers that I had a history of disruption, and stated that local authorities were investigating. The last part was technically true, I suppose, but only because they had called them. What they didn't know was that I'd already lawyered up. See, I'd worked on enough land development projects to know how HOA boards tend to operate: fast, loose, and dumb. I sent everything to my attorney, a guy I'd used in the past for property line disputes. Smart, calm, and absolutely vicious in depositions. He reviewed the footage, the letter, the lawsuit, and the drone videos. His response: let's bury them. Step 1 was to compile every bit of evidence. I pulled full exports from my perimeter cams, including time-stamped shots of the dump trucks. My drone videos showed the drivers opening the gates, unloading the trash, and even chatting while standing on my land. Some clips even caught the HOA's branded trucks driving onto what clearly wasn't theirs. Then we brought in the pros. A soil remediation expert took samples near the dump sites and found traces of chemical sealants, latex paint runoff, and fiberglass residue, none of which I had used on my property. An entomologist confirmed the sudden spike in rats and beetles near my hives was consistent with exposure to construction waste. My irrigation system? Half the back loop was clogged with dried cement and debris. I had the receipts for all of it. Every pipe I replaced, every repair. We submitted a formal counterclaim, $250,000, damages to land, loss of business use, harm to the bee colonies, intentional defamation, unlawful dumping, trespassing. That got their attention. Karen tried to dismiss it as a scare tactic, but my attorney filed it with exhibits, dozens of them. And I wasn't bluffing. I was playing long. Then came the subpoenas. My lawyer wanted everything: permits for the new homes, truck routes, who authorized what, and most importantly, who gave the order to dump on my land. Within a week, the HOA's tone changed. No more open letters, no more veiled threats, just silence. And in that silence, they made their next big mistake, trying to build leverage behind the scenes. One evening, I caught two men walking near my east tree line. Not workers, no uniforms, just polos, clipboards, and the kind of hush-hush behavior that triggers all my security protocols. I confronted them at the fence, politely but directly. They claimed they were land surveyors conducting an assessment for future expansion. "Who hired you?" I asked. They hesitated. One muttered something about Hollow Pines Infrastructure Committee. There's no such thing. They left quickly when I reminded them this was private land and that all footage was being live-streamed to cloud storage. The gloves were off. Things escalated fast after the surveyors incident. A few days later, I received a formal letter, this time from the Hollow Pines legal representative, accusing me of intimidating contractors and interfering with essential infrastructure assessments. It was hilarious in a grim way. They were trying to make it seem like I was the aggressor for telling two guys with no IDs to stay off my land. Meanwhile, they were the ones who'd been dumping debris into my orchard and ruining my irrigation lines. But I didn't react publicly. I kept my head down and my cameras rolling. That same week, my attorney sent a formal discovery request. That's when the real cracks started to show. Their responses were evasive. Dates didn't match. No signed permits. Most hilariously, there were no formal work orders or contracts for waste disposal. Nothing but vague internal memos and email printouts, none of which explained why their trash had ended up behind my tree line, 30 feet into my property. Then came the gold mine. In one email, we found a line from an HOA board member to a contractor saying, and I quote, "Use the backwoods past lot 11. The old guy next door isn't part of the association. No one cares what he thinks." The timestamp was 2 weeks before the first dump. The sender? Karen's VP. The recipient? A subcontractor whose license had expired the year prior. My attorney nearly did a fist pump. I authorized him to go full throttle. We filed a motion to compel testimony and documentation on every property transfer and contractor communication related to the new development. We also filed a secondary claim for environmental damages, not just from the dumping, but from unpermitted excavation near a protected runoff zone. That part wasn't even in my original plan, but the soil specialist flagged it during his assessment. Their bulldozers had dug too deep, too fast, and redirected part of the rainwater channel that drained through the hillside. Now it was flowing right through a patch of my land, eroding soil that had taken me a decade to stabilize. Meanwhile, I was still being painted as the villain. Karen had doubled down on the smear campaign, posting updates on the HOA newsletter. Disruption from neighboring property continues. Delays caused by outside actor. Preserve your values. Support the Hollow Pines Legal Fund. I read every line, with the calm detachment of a man watching a drowning person yell at the water. But I wasn't just defending myself. I started taking the offense more publicly. I called the county zoning office and filed a formal complaint regarding the dump site and the redirected runoff. Turns out Hollow Pines had failed to submit updated erosion control plans. When I sent over drone footage, they opened an investigation the same day. The next morning, a county inspector parked at their main office and walked the site with a clipboard and 2 deputies. I stood by my fence, sipping coffee like I was at a matinee. Then came the press. A local reporter, small-town outlet but tenacious, heard about the lawsuit and environmental complaints. She asked to interview me. I agreed, on one condition: she bring a camera crew and walk the line with me, on site. She did. We filmed a 10-minute segment showing the trash heaps, the damaged irrigation, the overflow path, and even the security footage of the dump trucks arriving. I didn't editorialize. I didn't rant. I just presented the facts. 2 days later, the story aired under the title Builder's Paradise or Neighbor's Nightmare. The fallout was immediate. A few prospective buyers dropped out. One real estate blog picked up the segment. A couple of residents inside Hollow Pines started emailing me anonymously, confirming that the HOA had been rushing approvals and ignoring safety measures. One woman told me they'd been warned not to talk to me under threat of community discipline. That's when I knew I had them cornered. I didn't care about revenge. I cared about the land. Mine, theirs, everyone's. And these people had not only polluted it, but tried to steamroll anyone who got in their way. Now they were the ones under scrutiny. With the county involved, the media circling, and the lawsuit getting nastier by the day, it was only a matter of time before someone cracked. And when they did, it would all come down on Karen's head. I didn't have to wait long for someone to crack. The first tremor came in the form of a deposition. We'd compelled one of the subcontractors, a middle-aged guy named Vince Calero, to testify under oath. He showed up looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Shirt too tight at the collar, palms visibly sweating. My attorney started slow. Names, dates, basic work history. Then he pivoted to the dumping. Were you instructed to dispose of construction materials near the eastern boundary of the Hollow Pines development? Vince hesitated. Sir, you're under oath, my lawyer reminded him. Vince sighed. Yeah. We were told to use the edge behind Lot 12. They said it was HOA-controlled woods. No one would notice. Who gave you that instruction? A pause. Mark Selby. He's on the HOA board, I think. Said Karen cleared it. Boom. That was all we needed, but it got better. Vince added, unsolicited, that the HOA hadn't just asked for quiet dumping. They'd also paid in cash for some weekend work to avoid drawing city attention. We filed to obtain phone records, payment receipts, and internal emails from the Hollow Pines Board. A judge granted it. At the same time, the zoning office issued a formal stop work order on 3 lots closest to my property, citing ongoing environmental review and unauthorized terrain modification. That meant every piece of equipment near my fence, bulldozers, graders, cement mixers had to sit idle. The construction zone was dead quiet for the first time in weeks. Karen, she was livid. She called a private press conference on the front lawn of the HOA's model home. Bad idea. Cameras rolled as she blamed an unstable neighbor with a vendetta for the construction delay. When asked about the county's order, she claimed it was routine. But it all unraveled when a reporter asked her directly, "Did you authorize the disposal of debris on Mr. Banks's property?" She paused, flinched, then walked away without answering. That same evening, I got a visit, not from the HOA, but from a man named Clarence Greeley, a quiet, unassuming guy. Turns out he'd sold a 10-acre patch of forest land to Hollow Pines 5 years ago. Only one problem, he said he'd never authorized building within 20 feet of the property line. According to Clarence, the sales agreement was for conservation purposes only. He'd seen my interview and wanted to compare property maps. We did. And what we found made my stomach flip. Part of one of the new homes, Lot 14, was actually overlapping my property by 6 feet. The rear deck was sitting on my land. Worse, Clarence's deed contained a clause forbidding construction within 30 feet of the stream, which HOA had clearly ignored. That meant 2 houses were built illegally, and 3 more were being prepped for foundations that might violate that buffer. Clarence agreed to testify. He handed over copies of the original land sale agreement, including a notarized map and a clause signed by, Karen Glazer. That night, I updated my motion to include a claim for property encroachment and zoning violations. I also emailed the footage and scanned documents to the county commissioner's office. The next morning, they froze Hollow Pines development permits indefinitely. No building, no sales, no open houses. Not until the investigation concluded. By now, Hollow Pines was hemorrhaging reputation. Residents inside the community started whispering about special board meetings and damage control plans. But you can't control rot once it's out in the sun. Then came the final straw. One of the HOA's own board members, Mark Selby, the same one Vince named, contacted my lawyer. He was ready to turn over his email archive. Said he didn't want to be the fall guy. In exchange for limited immunity in the civil case, he provided a PDF folder full of internal correspondence, messages between Karen, board members, and contractors showing they knowingly dumped waste on my land, falsified maps, and pushed permits through without proper review. One email from Karen read, "If that guy on the ridge complains again, we'll just tell him it was a mistake and clean it up. He's bluffing. He's not one of us." Not one of us. They were about to learn just how right she was. The morning the full discovery went public, I watched the world tilt. The judge unsealed our filings after Mark Selby's testimony was entered into the record, and with it, the avalanche began. Local media outlets picked it up first, then regional ones. HOA scandal in Hollow Pines, illegal dumping, and forged permits alleged. The article included side-by-side photos, one of my trashed orchard, another of Karen beaming at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The contrast was brutal. Karen tried to spin it again. She released a statement blaming disgruntled contractors and out-of-context documents, but nobody was buying it. Selby's emails painted a damning picture. Deliberate actions, not mistakes. Even HOA members began whispering about an emergency vote to remove her. Meanwhile, buyers started pulling out of deals. One of the realtors tried to claim routine construction delays. I sent that clip to the county inspector with a polite note. Might want to review the eastern boundary of Lot 14 again. But the hammer dropped when the district attorney's office formally launched a criminal investigation. They reached out to me for all evidence I'd compiled. I handed over everything: drone footage, motion camera clips, signed surveys, the soil toxicity reports, and Clarence's signed affidavit. Every rock I'd turned over revealed another worm. They couldn't look away. Within a week, Karen was served with a subpoena. Meanwhile, HOA board meetings became war zones. I wasn't invited, of course not, but that didn't stop two of the residents from sending me audio recordings. They were furious about the lost property value, the frozen developments, and the now infamous video of Karen saying, "He's not one of us." That phrase had taken on a life of its own online. People were using it as a meme, splashing it over pictures of my private property, HO not welcome sign, which had now gone mildly viral in the region. I'll admit, I had that one printed on a mug. As the legal gears ground forward, I prepared for the counterattack. I knew Karen wasn't done. Not yet. Sure enough, she filed a motion claiming emotional distress, seeking $75,000 in damages for harassment, defamation, and damage to community trust. Her attorney tried to argue that my footage violated her privacy. We responded with a simple point. All filming was conducted on or from my property, directed at illegal activities occurring on my land. Then we submitted a motion of our own to compel Hollow Pines to pay for environmental remediation. My restoration engineer filed a professional assessment detailing the cost of cleaning the soil, replacing damaged irrigation systems, and restoring the bee habitat lost to construction debris and chemical leaching. The estimate? Over $200,000. We rounded it up and included legal fees, coming to a clean $250,000. It wasn't just money, it was proof that they'd taken something from me that they had no right to, and now the bill had come due. The court scheduled a formal hearing. Both parties were ordered to appear. Karen tried to have it delayed. Her attorney claimed medical reasons, but the judge wasn't having it. When the day came, she showed up wearing oversized sunglasses and a sour scowl, flanked by two board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The courtroom was packed. I walked in wearing my work boots, clean jeans, and a crisp button-down. My lawyer handed me a folder of exhibits like it was a trophy. One of the reporters tried to catch my eye, but I ignored the flash of the camera. I was here for one reason only, to finish this. The judge was blunt. There appear to be substantial claims of property encroachment, zoning violations, and unlawful waste disposal, she said, all of which will be heard today. Karen's lawyer opened with a weak attempt to cast me as hostile. Mr. Banks has a long-standing grudge against our client and used public channels to wage a campaign of personal revenge, but the judge had read the file. He had surveillance equipment on his own land. Your client's contractors are seen dumping debris in multiple videos, and your own board member has confirmed verbal authorization. Silence. Then we presented our counterclaim: the soil damage, the bees, the irrigation system, Clarence's affidavit, the drone footage with time-stamped overlays, the overhead maps showing the exact property lines. It wasn't just a defense anymore, It was an annihilation. By the time the court broke for lunch, Karen's team looked like they'd swallowed thumbtacks. The judge had not only admitted all of our evidence without objection, but had also hinted, strongly, that criminal referrals were not off the table. Karen refused to make eye contact. Her lawyer, a wiry guy with a nervous cough, looked like he was calculating the quickest exit out the nearest window. But I wasn't done. As the hearing resumed, we rolled out the final piece of our assault, the property encroachment. I had a land surveyor take the stand, a quiet, precise man with blueprints and GPS coordinates for days. He pointed out how the rear deck of Lot 14 wasn't just grazing my land, it was firmly planted 6 feet into it. No easement, no agreement, no notice. Just pure, uncut arrogance. He had the digital scans, time-stamped records, and municipal overlays to prove it. Karen's defense? We didn't realize the line was incorrect, but we had emails from her months earlier acknowledging a tight buffer near the ridge, where we'll fudge the edge until we finalize permits. Her words, her email, her signature. Then Clarence Greeley, the former landowner, took the stand. He was a revelation, calm, gentlemanly, but devastatingly clear. He walked the court through the original conservation agreement with Hollow Pines, signed and notarized, explicitly barring development within 30 feet of the stream and prohibiting dumping of any kind. He described his shock upon seeing cement poured over that same buffer zone with no notice or permission when he handed over his copy of the signed map to the judge and quietly said, "This is the original." It's been unaltered since 2017. I saw Karen close her eyes like she'd just been punched in the lungs. It was over. The judge ordered an immediate injunction, all construction halted, permits suspended, and a temporary restraining order placed on any further activity by the HOA or its affiliates within 50 feet of my land. She ruled that the deck must be removed within 30 days. The encroachment constituted unlawful occupation. The soil would be remediated under county oversight. And the HOA was held liable for legal fees and property damages in excess of $300,000, plus possible civil penalties still under review. Karen tried one last move. "I object," she said suddenly, standing up, uninvited. The judge looked up slowly. "Ms. Glazer, you are not counsel. Sit down." "But this is harassment. He's trying to destroy the community." "Ms. Glazer, you signed falsified permits and authorized dumping. If anyone destroyed this community, it was you. Sit down." She did. The moment court adjourned, half the press pool followed me into the hallway. I didn't say much, just one sentence before heading home. Property lines aren't a suggestion. That night, I poured myself a stiff drink, walked out to the edge of my land where the debris used to lie, and watched as the county's environmental team laid down fencing for soil testing. The forest was quiet again. I could hear my bees humming around the hives now that the stink of paint and diesel was gone. 2 days later, the Hollow Pines HOA board held an emergency vote. Karen was removed unanimously. No speeches, no excuses. They issued a public apology, not to me, but to their own members, blaming mismanagement and breakdowns in oversight. Cowards. But I wasn't surprised. Let them rebuild trust among themselves. My land wasn't part of their experiment anymore. I put in a call to a local welder the next day, had a special gate built, 10 feet tall, reinforced steel, motion lights on both sides. Above it, a laser-cut sign that read, "Private property, not HOA territory. Take your trash elsewhere." And below it, just for me, a small bronze plate that read, "Not one of us." Damn right I'm not. After everything, you'd think I'd feel triumphant, maybe even celebratory. But the morning the demolition crew showed up, I just felt tired. I watched from my porch as a county-ordered team rolled heavy machinery up the slope behind Lot 14. They were there to dismantle the illegal deck that had crept 6 feet onto my land. No one from the HOA showed up. Karen, I heard, had retained criminal counsel. The new interim president, some soft-spoken dentist named Arnold, sent me a letter apologizing on behalf of the association. I never opened it. It went straight into the fire pit. 3 men in hard hats took apart the deck like they were unzipping a tent. Boards creaked, metal brackets groaned, the sound echoed across the ridge. Each plank tossed onto the flatbed truck felt like a piece of Karen's empire collapsing into itself. I'd been patient long enough. By the end of the week, the county's environmental engineers began soil remediation on the damaged border strip. They laid down biobarriers, dug up contaminated topsoil, and treated the worst patches chemically. The beehives were moved temporarily, but the queen survived, and most of the colony endured. The garden was scarred, but not dead. The land would heal. It always does when you give it a chance. I wasn't done improving things either. I hired a fencing crew to finish what I started. They installed a 10-foot steel perimeter fence around the rear border, complete with motion sensors, security lighting, and coded gate access. Every post was anchored in concrete. No more fudged lines, no more silent dumping. And on the front gate, I mounted a custom-made sign etched in burnished aluminum. Private property, no HOA access. Trespassers will be dumped back. Was it petty? Absolutely. But it was earned. The media eventually moved on. HOA scandals weren't as sexy once the court orders were signed and the backhoes rolled out. But within the development itself, the damage lingered. 3 buyers canceled their contracts. One homeowner sued the HOA for fraud. Another threatened to move. The developers went into damage control, slashing prices and whispering apologies. None of it reached me, though. My land was off-limits, and my mailbox bore a new plaque underneath the address. Not part of Hollow Pines HOA. The best part? No one ever challenged it. The state's attorney general announced a broader investigation into mismanaged HOAs the following month. Karen was reportedly interviewed by investigators. I didn't follow the outcome too closely, but I heard rumors. Disbarment proceedings, possible charges of fraud, zoning violations. I didn't care anymore. My war was over. Let the rest of the world deal with its Karens. In the end, I built something I hadn't planned on. Not just a fence, not just a legal wall, but a legacy. Proof that when someone tries to bulldoze your boundaries, literal or otherwise, you can push back. And if you do it right, the only thing left standing is your property and your spine. One morning, a few weeks later, I stood near the hives, sipping coffee, watching a pair of bluebirds flutter over the fresh mulch. The air smelled like cedar and new grass. The scars were still there, visible in the soil, in the memories, but they were mine. The land was mine. And now, finally, peace was too.